Welcome to Conversations with the Masters. What do you do when there's new competition that's potentially disrupting your sales cycle? What do you do when the economy turns and all of a sudden you're under stress? What do you do when you're not innovating as fast as others and again losing momentum? Let's flip that. Let's say you're successful, but you're worried about new disruption, maybe coming from AI or technology or a new competitor coming out of the blue, stealing your sales and your growth. Well, we're going to help you with all of that today. Our expert today is Ron Carr, and he is a sales and leadership expert who's going to be teaching us how to maximize value and opportunity while streamlining your sales cycle. Boy, I can't wait for this one. Ron is a master at helping clients create more value when they're under price pressure, often competing in a very crowded space and trying to seize opportunities while their core markets are declining. I'm sure we've all experienced that at one time or another. He has helped clients on 6 continents who are experiencing this, building high-performance sales cultures that generated incremental revenue of over $1 billion. He's the author of the bestseller Lead, Sell, or Get Out of the Way. And his latest best-selling book is titled The Velocity Mindset: How Leaders Eliminate Resistance, Gain Buy-in, and Achieve Better Results Faster. All right, let's get right down to it. Welcome, Ron.
Hi, Daniel. How are you today?
I'm doing great, and I hope you're doing great as well. And we are excited for this one.
So am I.
Well, we all experience the things that I talked about at the beginning of this, and your book, Velocity Mindset, is great. I highly recommend it. We'll talk about that as we go. What is a velocity mindset? Give us a little tee up of what do you mean by that?
Sure. So, Daniel, when you hear the word velocity, what's the first word that comes to your mind?
Well, it isn't speed in my case. Now, I know most people would be thinking speed, but when I was just flying coast to coast, and the pilot did not have the throttle going full the entire way. That would be fast, but that would also be stupid. Instead, what he found was a strategic velocity that would get them there in the shortest amount of time without burning all of his resources and in a powerful way. So to me, velocity and speed are indeed different things, and that's one of the things that drew me to your title.
You're the only one who's gotten that correct. Of all the audiences and it doesn't surprise me, by the way, Daniel, but let's take that a step further. The physics definition of velocity is speed with direction. And that's what you're talking about. And if people just think it's speed, then they're likely going to get burnout, but they're certainly not going to get velocity. And the example I use is a pilot also. So let's suppose you go into Newark Airport and you want to fly to London. If you ask the pilot, where are we going? And he says, wherever the winds take us, would you stay on that plane? And the answer obviously is no. But what does a pilot do? They start with the end in sight first. They start with London. They work their way back. They pick 3 or 4 waypoints so they know if they fly over those waypoints, they're on their way. And they factor in all the storms, the obstacles, so that they can come up with the fastest and safest way to get from Newark to London. That's what a pilot does, and that's true velocity. When I wrote the velocity mindset, I realized that a lot of things that stop us or that put drag on our velocity is not the external factors, like the economy and all that. I mean, that affects all of us. It's more about our own obstacles that we put into it. And so I looked at it, because I had a series of setbacks myself. I'm now coming back from my 3rd major setback in 6 years in terms of some accidents and health. And every time you get a setback in life, you tend to develop a story in your mind as to whether or not you think you can come back, why you can't come back, and all that. Stories are part of the obstacles we put in our minds that prevent us from having velocity. It takes us away from moving forward. It takes us away from listening to our gut when our intuition really comes to play. And so stories are emotional based, Daniel. they have emotion attached to them, as you know, because as speakers, we use stories in our speeches. So if a story gives you an edge and it pushes you forward, for example, an example that I use is, let's suppose that you're in an elementary school and you're trying out for band in school. And there's two kids trying out and they have no musical talent whatsoever. And the teacher would say the same thing to both kids, kid A and kid B. Say, look, you really don't have the talent for this. Why don't you go do something that you really love and enjoy life? Well, one kid can take that and develop a story saying, oh, she said I was no good. I'm going to become the best pianist in the world. That's the chip on the shoulder. That story is serving that person well, and they'll do whatever they have to do to become that pianist. The other kid heard the same thing, but now they're developing a different story saying, oh, I'll never like music. I'll never be good at this. Why would I even listen to a tune again? And they move as far away from music as you can think possible. Two different people hearing the same thing, but developing different stories. We develop stories all the time.
Yeah. Now I wanted to add a comment to that, and that is that you were relating it to an individual, but companies have their story. Companies have their cultural story,
Yes.
often coming from the leader, but not always. Sometimes it's not directed by the leader, and it should be, but it's not. And it could be a negative story that is just as harmful as the personal negative stories that you're talking about. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, usually when a culture is negatively impacted by a story that doesn't serve the organization well, it's usually led by a leader who doesn't have control of the story. Let's put it that way.
Ooh, good point. I like that.
And when I mean control of the story, I'm not talking about being a dictator. I'm talking about they're not paying attention at the steering wheel. They're not paying attention to what the story is in the company. Is it serving it well, or is it creating obstacles that's creating drag on the company's velocity?
I like that. Very good. Very good. So what are some of the things, tell us a little bit more about the velocity mindset then,
Sure.
and some of the elements of it.
So we talk about stories as being one foundation because it's one thing we have to get a handle on. I did it wasn't a real statistical analysis, but it was, let's say, not too statistical. But I called some colleagues up and I said, hey, tell me when you made some assumptions, a story, and it didn't prove true. How much time did you spend on that? How much time did you spend on anger? How much time did you spend on energy? How much time did you spend on ruminating? How much time did you spend on not doing anything? And basically, they all came up with the effect of about 3 weeks a year with totally wasted time because of the fact that they would just, stop by those stories. What could you do if you had 3 more weeks in a year? That's the question. How much more velocity can you gain? So the stories usually do not serve as well. The other thing that we do is we don't have the right destiny in mind. So I'll give you an example from a sales situation. Let's suppose that it takes 5 calls to get a new customer on board. And the sales executive calls me up and says, hey, Ron, I've been after this prospect for the longest time, and I'm so happy. And I got this appointment. What do I do? And I'll say, well, what's your goal for the call? And it's the first call. And they said, oh, I want to close this deal. I said, okay, but what's your sales cycle? 5 calls. So let me see if I get this straight. You're on your first call of a 5-call sales cycle and you're going in to close the deal. If that's what you're going to do, you're going to be doing the wrong things in that call. You're going to be puking people who utter knowledge about everything, and you're not going to be asking any questions, and you will be off that call in 5 minutes. To me, an appropriate destiny for that call is qualify them if they're good for you and you're good for them, and then together work out a path forward. That's the appropriate call for that goal, for a goal for that call. So what I find is most people are not going after the right goal or the right destiny. And destiny is so important because it drives the actions you will take. And if you're taking the wrong actions, that also creates drag on your velocity.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think the key there is, first of all, what is the end goal? And knowing, as you said, I think this is really good for us to hear, you're probably not going to close them on that first call. So what is the ideal? And of course, I know I like to get them talking. I want to ask them strategic questions that can help me to see what their pain really is. And once I can see what their pain really is, then my mind's working in the background. I'm seeing how I can use my solutions to solve their greatest personal pain. And by the way, I didn't say just company pain. I said personal pain, because if I can help their personal pain, boo, now I'm getting somewhere. Talk to me about that.
Well, look, you and I are cut from the same cloth. I remember when you wrote your first book. I mean, I bought hundreds of it to give out to people. We're thinking on the same wavelength. But unfortunately, Daniel, most people don't think like that. You know what the first questions they ask? Status-based questions. Well, who are you currently using? What are you currently doing? And all you're doing is you're raising the cortisol. So the third part of the book, we actually get into the neuroscience findings that came out, because I actually stumbled upon this. So I was brought in by a major national investment house. They knew the numbers. It took 5 calls to get a new investor on board. They wanted to reduce the sales cycle. So they knew who their market was. It was actually written up in the Harvard Business Review. Their market was one-man offices, so they only could use conservative investors, because anybody who would trade 5 times a day, you can't do that with a one-man office. So they wanted people that would come in for the quarter, give their assets, they come up with a plan, and then they wouldn't bother the advisor for another quarter to see how it did and make changes and so forth. All right, so they knew who their market was. So I went, and so they cold called, because it was retirees. So I went on a cold call with them, and it was a nice Midwestern couple right outside Chicago. And we called in, and the guy walks in, and the first thing he does is he starts creating that social relationship. You know what social relationship I'm talking about. They want to become friends. So they look at the pictures on the wall, and they're saying, oh, you're a Bears fan. Oh, that was a bad game, wasn't it? And they start talking about the Bears game. And they say, oh, these are your grandchildren. Tell me about them. I'm looking at my watch. It was 12 minutes before he actually got to something of substance. And I can see in those 12 minutes, the husband and the wife being very polite, but their eyes rolling around like, what are these guys doing here? So then all of a sudden he asked a fateful question. So tell me, who are you currently using for your stocks and bonds? And I'm going, oh, no, we got somebody already and we're out of there. And I said to him, and in between the calls, I said, listen, they already got somebody for stocks and bonds. If that's how you're going to position yourself, there's no conversation. You're here about the future. So if I could recommend something to you, cut the chit chat down to 2 minutes. Just go in, introduce yourself, be nice, and then say this. I got a really important question to ask you. Would you mind if I do? And they'll most probably say yes, because they have no idea why you're there. And the question you're going to ask is, I'm not here about stocks and bonds. I know you got somebody. I'm here about your future. When it comes to your financial future, what are the 3 things you're worrying about today?
Perfect.
You ask that question. And so what I noticed, and this was before the neuroscience findings came out, Daniel, what I noticed is when we ask a question like that, what are the 3 things you want to do? What are the 3 things that are bothering you? Whatever it is, the 3 things. Everybody's eyes went up. Some went up to the left, some went up to the right, but they all went up. And I realized that there was something significantly changing in that. So sales executives are leaders. If they don't believe that, then they have a problem to begin with. But anytime you're asking somebody to do something, influencing somebody, that's a leadership role, okay? So if we accept the fact that we're leaders, we have to accept the fact that it's our job that before we even have a conversation to understand what mindset the customer or prospect is in, and how can we put them into the right mindset so they'll be engaged with us. If all we're doing, so let's put it this way. I know that if I'm doing a cold call, I'm an interruption. I'm an interruption, period, and a drill. You're in the middle of doing something, or you're at home at dinner and I'm asking you about your long distance service. I'm an interruption. Now, whenever you get interrupted, do you get a little agitated, Daniel?
Yeah, of course.
Of course you do. So we know that there's cortisol, the fight or flight hormone. You don't get rid of cortisol. But as leaders, we have to understand that if they're likely to be agitated, then their cortisol is out of whack, which is going to prevent them from engaging with us. So cortisol, if it's a 0 to 2 number, they're listening, but they're not really engaged. 3 to 5, they're really engaged. They're asking you questions. They want to do it. And they say, okay, when can we start? They start having a little doubt. You interrupt them at dinner. It goes up to a 6 or 7. Now you're getting a little agitated. And if you're talking about something that's wasting their time, or they think it's wasting their time, or they don't need it, it goes up to an 8, 9, and they cut you out. Either mentally they're not listening, or they walk away. So if we know that their cortisol is going to be agitated just a little bit, why would we ask a question about what they're currently doing? All that's going to do is raise the cortisol even more, because they're going to say, why do I have to educate you? That's not my job. But the moment and I do this on stage, we do this now in our actual keynotes, we bring 2 people up, and organically the whole audience does it. We did it last week in Vegas. And when they can see the eyes rolling up, it happens all the time, Daniel. Try it with somebody. You'll see the eyes going up. I asked a person right in the middle of the role play, on that second role play, when she asked you that different question and your eyes went up, was there a shift in your mindset? And they say, absolutely. Can you describe it for us? And they said, well, when they asked me, where are you trying to go? It was all about me. It was no longer about them. So I didn't have any fears that they were trying to sell me something. And I started thinking about it. And I started coming up with some answers. And they always give you 3 answers. The reason we go for 3, because if they give you 1 and you can't deal with it, well, you got nothing else to talk about. If you ask for 3, you're probably going to have a conversation coming out of that answer. And also, we know that psychologically, keynote speakers use a power of 3. That's why you ask for 3. If you ask for 1, they can't think of anything. You have nothing to talk about. So that change is so dramatic that now they release oxytocin. Oxytocin is known as the love and trust hormone. Now, it doesn't get released in a big way from there, but it gets released enough, Daniel, that they at least give you 3 issues that are important to them, and that you're going to have that conversation. Now, Daniel, let's suppose you had a sales rep who was like you or me. They understood this, and instead of asking you status-based questions, they're asking you, what are the 3 things most important to you? Your eyes go up, and you're in that zone, right? And you start giving it to me. You have to trust me to give me any kind of answer. Is that a fair statement? And then, are you feeling good about the conversation? The answer is yes. So dopamine starts being released. Dopamine only rides with oxytocin. You can't have one without the other. So that's all we're going to do for neuroscience. I'm not a neuroscientist. I've studied it though. But at least, and Scott Halford, a good friend of us, he was able to help me formulate this because he got his PhD in neuroscience. And then he calls me the genius for having figured it out on the sales process. Go figure. But at the end of the day, it's made such dramatic results. Let me share a result. I was actually doing some of these cold calls, and the partners said, hey, we got a class in of reps that have been in the field for 4 to 7 years. Can you do an hour for them at the end of the day? And I said, sure. And I did the hour. Well, one of the reps, and we're all staying in the same hotel, he calls me up at 11 o'clock at night in my room. And he goes, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I need to talk to you. I said, fine. What's going on? He goes, I did exactly what you said. I had 2 widows. Both had $100,000. One I'm working with for 6 months and one for 2 months. And I couldn't get them to pull the trigger. I said, what did you do? He said, I called them both up tonight and I used your question. I said, I apologize. I was remiss that I didn't have the most important conversation with you. And would you mind if I asked you this question? They both said, go ahead. And he asked him the question, what are the 3 things you want your money to provide for you in the future? And they got into conversations they didn't get into in any of the conversations he had before. One of them committed their funds to him that night. That's how fast it happened. And the other one gave him another appointment. So it's real, it works, and it works fast. The question is, are you in the mindset to carry it out?
Well, I love how you brought in the biochemistry. I haven't had guests that bring in biochemistry, but yet it is important, and it is part of how all of this works. And again, it's not about, it's never about me. It's about the person I'm serving.
Right.
And in a way, I'm qualifying them to see if I am in a position to exceed expectations. So, a lot of times we think, they're qualifying us.
Right.
And its reality is, well, actually, I'm qualifying them. If I can't exceed expectations, I'm going to have trouble holding on to them as a client. I would rather hold on to them for a long period of time. This is not a transaction. It's the beginning of a relationship.
But
And relationships, of course, are based on trust and those types of things.
But you're bringing up something else here that you're not alluding to, and we have to for the audience. You know who your ideal markets are. Just like that financial services firm did. You know what you're looking for. And people have to understand. I have a retainer client. I've been a retainer for 10 years. The CEO finally retired. He got to where he wanted to be. It's been a great success story. But my first couple of years, this company was a small company, $8 million. And they were doing 450 bids a year. Now, they are a custom fabricator. So these bids can take anywhere from an hour to 2 days. Very complicated. And they're not qualified, these bids. They get them on the fax machine back in the old days, and they just put all their talent towards it. We cut their bids in half, Daniel, from 450 to 250, and they doubled their revenue. Why? Because they weren't wasting their high paid engineers' time on bids that weren't for ideal clients. We then shifted them to spend more time in the field finding the best mousetrap for the right clients, which allowed them to get more profitable business from each and every one of those companies. And that's how we doubled their revenue.
This is so powerful. I was just talking to someone who they know I've got, way over 1 million followers on LinkedIn, et cetera, et cetera. And they said, they gave me an idea of the kind of posts they're posting. And I said, well, you're fishing for any fish. That's your problem. You have to define exactly what is the fish you're fishing for and design the lure for that fish. In other words, who are we really after? And then what are their greatest pains? What are the things that are keeping them up? Go ahead.
Who are we really after? And are we true to ourselves? Because when we try to be everything to everybody, I gave about a year ago, I gave a keynote for Wind Supply. Wind Supply in the US is a major supply house for all the bathroom fixtures and so forth that they sell to plumbers and so forth. And when I do keynotes, I interview people, and I'll sometimes videotape them, play it for the audience. And there's one guy, I was giving this keynote right in the middle of the supply chain shortage. So by all accounts, this office manager in Texas, he should have been down in business. He doubled his business that year. You know why? Because he concentrated on his existing customers, and he did what I would have coached him to do. He went to them and said, look, what's your biggest issue going forward? That we have supply. He said, great, here's how I can do it for you. You order for the whole year now. Don't order for every 5 weeks now. Order for the whole year. You pay for the inventory. I'll have it on stock, and we will not have a supply chain shortage for you. I can promise that. And then they turned away business from new customers because they knew it would take away from their ability to support all those customers that got them to where they were that day. And they doubled their business in a supply chain shortage era. Go figure.
Well, we promised in the beginning that we were going to teach people how to maximize value and opportunity while shortening or streamlining the sales cycle. And I think we're doing exactly that. I mean, look, we're all selling something.
Right.
A baby is selling when it's crying. It's selling you on taking action. So we're all in sales in some way. And of course, we're now referring to our sales team or the people that are doing the selling and making sure they have the right mindset, the velocity mindset, so they can achieve something. By the way, let's bring up that book. I want people to get this book. So there it is, The Velocity Mindset, Achieving, I love bigger and better results faster. There's a link that you can get with your phone if you want to grab it right now. I highly recommend it. Let's go and get that thing. Also, let's also put up a link to your website so that we can see how to get in touch with you and see what all you do and all the other services that you provide, because you do a lot. And you're really, I think, if I remember right, your main focus is sales and leadership in putting those together and elevating the conversations that we have. So with that said, let's talk about elevating the conversations, which you've been doing, but what are some other ways that we can elevate the conversations?
So when you know a value proposition is CNC, cost of no change, minus CC, cost of change equals PV. So let's take the Velocity Mindset book. It costs $28. All right, that's the cost of change. So cost of no change is not shortening your sales cycle, whatever that's going to cost you, and no money you're leaving on the table, minus $28, that's your perceived value. All right. It's obviously going to be a tremendous perceived value because what you'll lose is far, far outweighs the $28. But that also doesn't account for the time that you may have to spend to go on Amazon to buy it, or if you're going to a bookstore or whatever. What I'm saying to you is in that perceived value formula, the CNC, cost of no change, has to be in multiples higher than the cost of change. They have to believe that it's such a no-brainer that they're going to do it. The reason why we come up short a lot of times is because in our conversations, we're not focusing on outcomes. Outcomes are the bottom line results people are going to get from using our products or services. We're resulting on the features. We're concentrating on the features, on the how it works. So your features, your product, or there's two parts to the human body for influence. There's the heart and there's the mind. When you go to features, you go straight to the mindful conversation. But all that's doing is comparing, but they're not ready for that if you haven't had the emotional connection in the heart yet. That's why we ask, what are the 3 things you're trying to do or that are bothering you? Because that's the emotional connection. And then that opens the mind to hear about when you speak with the product. So what I'd recommend to your audience is number 1, when you lead the conversation, don't lead with the product. Don't lead with the service. All right. They're not buying a drill. They're buying the hole that the drill makes. You need to find out the hole that they're after. You need to find out the hole that they have in their lives that you fill up. One of the things I teach my clients in sales, especially, don't compete, create. Don't try and do the same thing someone else is doing. Find the gaps that haven't been filled yet. Fill those gaps, and then there won't be any competition. And the other thing, I'm sorry, one more thing about a high-performing sales culture, that's not just the sales team. This is important. That's the whole company. Everybody is in sales. Everybody supports it. Whether you're supporting a sales rep and getting a quote out, whether you're supporting the customer directly and speaking to them, everybody supports it, because if anybody has a negative interaction, it takes away from the velocity we've worked so hard to get to up to that point.
Yeah, I like it. I really like it. You just made me think of a movie that I saw, which was it was a great movie about James Brown. And James Brown, for those of us who remember, he had amazing musicians, and boy, did they have beat going. I mean, so there was a scene in the movie that I love where he went around and he said to the bass player, "What do you play?" And he said, "I play bass." And he said, "No, you don't get it." Went to the guy who played the guitar. "What do you play?" He said, "I play guitar." No, not at all. Went to the sax player. "Where do you play?" "Sax." No. And then he went to the guy who was playing a trombone and he said, "What do you play?" And he said, "I play the drums." He said, "Yes, you all play the drums. You all play the drums on your instrument." And I love that because now, again, I put myself through college playing lead guitar in a rock band. I do, I do understand. I play a number of instruments, and the reality is, it is all about that, which holds it all together. So, using that metaphor, hey, we're all in sales. We need a sales culture for sure.
When I came out with Lead Seller, Get Out of the Way, I got a letter from a retired professor, college professor, which you'll like. And he said if I was reading this book when I was still teaching, I would have been a better teacher.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, so coming back
to bring your story back around. So when it comes to sales, I say, what are you selling? And they're all talking about their product. Same thing like the drums. And I'm saying, no, you're selling the outcomes.
And it's easy to forget this. Now, I understood this, but I made a mistake of forgetting it when I launched my Anticipatory organization learning system. I mean, I went crazy, developed our own platform for it, and used all these great things that were very innovative. I didn't compete. I looked at all of the best learning systems so that I knew what not to do, and instead took it to a new level that none of them were doing. And then I made the mistake. I started out by talking about all the great things that we were teaching you and features and functions. So stupid. Until I started realizing, no, they don't care about any of that stuff. I need to be talking about their pain and the results that we get. And once we started talking about the results, the amazing results that people were getting in the learning system, they didn't even ask about the features and functions. They didn't even care about how it was developed. They didn't care about any of that. It was a done deal. So I made the mistake, and I'm just saying, we can forget that. So maybe you've known this all along, but maybe right now you, who is listening, maybe you've launched something and wondering why it's not going so well. Well, it could be you forgot some of this important lesson. It ain't about features and functions. And as he said, you got to grab the heart and the mind. You can't just grab one or the other.
Yeah, it's we're emotional creatures, Daniel, and we're susceptible to our emotions just as well as how it can push us forward. And if we're not, I put in the velocity mindset the concept of having a board meeting with yourself. A board meeting is me, myself, and I. My first sales job was selling copiers, and I got seduced into this job in 1980. It was the first time that Royal Business Machines came out with a new plain bond copier. No more liquid toner to get all over your clothes and everything. And it was 15 crisp copies a minute. I said, where's the collator? 6 months from now. Where's the duplicator? 6 months from now. So I go on my first call and I speak to an office manager, and she goes, well, can you compete with that big machine on the third floor? And I go, no. Well, when you can, come back and see me. Well, after not selling a thing for 4 months, Daniel, 4 months, I started developing some powerful stories. I can't sew. What made you think I can do that? Why am I here? You're such a fraud. The same thing we all put ourselves through. So I had a board meeting, and where do you go for a board meeting in New Jersey? You go to the diner. So I'm in the diner, and I'm talking to myself, say, hey, what's going on? I can't sew. Why not? Every time I bring up a copy, they compare it to the Xerox machine on the third floor, and I can't compete. I said, so stop competing. What's a copier? The end result, well, it's a part of a communication vehicle. Let's talk about that. So I get into the office, the next one. I said, would you agree that a copy is nothing more than a communication vehicle? She goes, absolutely. I said, so what are your 3 biggest challenges? And Daniel, it's like all of a sudden I was a psychiatrist and she was on my couch. She said, can we talk? She goes, Sally or Jim have to make 1 copy. They get up on the first floor. They talk to everybody to the staircase. They go up the staircase. Then they have to wait behind all these big jobs. By the time they come back, it could take 2 hours. I said, 2 hours? How often does that happen? Try the equivalent of 2 full-time employees. I said, how would you like them back? She goes, how are you going to get them back? I said, I'm not here to sell you a copy against that third floor. That's a great machine. Keep it. I'm here to fill in your gaps. As a matter of fact, I'm not here to sell you 1 machine. I'm here to sell you 3, 1 per floor. someone gets up, they get the copy done immediately, and you get back those 2 full-time employees. I sold 3 machines that day, and I started selling multiple machines thereafter. What changed? Not the product. I still didn't have a lot to offer. It was the conversation that was coming from me.
And you did a little listening, asked some strategic questions, and they spilled their guts. They told you, and you were listening with a opportunity antenna up.
Absolutely.
And you were listening for, what is that thing that I can solve that's their great pain?
And that's the thing
that doesn't do everything. And you found the answer. Well, that was a great one. As a matter of fact, you've got a self-assessment that I think you're making available to all of those right now. Let's put up how to get that self-assessment. There we go. And tell us a little bit about what that self-assessment is, because this is something that you would normally charge for. It's free. Why don't I would like you all to get that. Tell us what that does.
Sure. So what it is, it's a free assessment. It's 5 areas that we cover in the book, and we ask people to self-rate themselves. And then they get a score back in the email. And then they also get in the same email best practices of how they can increase their scores in those 5 specific areas.
Wow, that's well, thank you for giving that to everybody, and make sure we take advantage of that. So we're getting closer to the end of our time. Boy, it's gone fast.
It has.
And and again, it's the psychology of sales we're talking about here, and we're also talking about the sales culture and the psychology of your entire sales culture. So this is it's made up of individuals, but again, the sales culture needs to evolve over time and realize the important things. So if we've got people that are listening to this right now wondering, well, what are some of the first steps I should take? And I've already got one. Take the self-assessment. That's a good place to start. But give us a couple of, all right, so here's some things I suggest you do when you're finished watching this.
So number 1, look at the results that you're getting and ask yourself if those are the results that you're after. And if they're not, what could you do differently to get to those results? For example, I've had a lot of insurance agents come, or investment reps come to me and say that they want to increase their earnings, by $300,000, the money that they take home. And I said, well, something's got to give, because if you're only dealing with $250,000 investors, that means you're going to have to bring on a whole boatload of new investors. And A, where you're going to find them, and B, how you're going to service them. Or you can raise your minimum and raise it to 500,000 or $750,000, and therefore you're automatically increasing the revenue from the existing business. So it's not just about your sales activity. It's not just the number of calls. It's whether or not you're having the right conversations on the calls, and whether or not you're looking at the right qualities of what you're looking for in the ideal prospect.
Yeah, and a thought that just came to mind when you were saying that, and another thing to ask yourself is there a better customer?
Yes.
Because we have a customer in mind, we have the target customer, but you know what? There's many different types of customers. You may have a much better customer that has no problem with your fee and is looking for a lot of what you do, but you don't have them defined yet.
Yeah, so this 10-year retainer that I'm talking to, most of their business was commercial. And 2 years into the relationship, I said to the CEO, I said, the Navy is in your backyard. What you do is ideal. You've done a couple of these Navy projects. I think we should have a Navy division. And we put a guy in charge. And now that's doing 80% of the growth of the company, because the commercial was the part that drove the company. But those legacy accounts were no longer serving them well. Why? One huge legacy account, a company we all know, was great for them, giving them a couple of $1 million a year. But then when they went to auction buying, and it was all about price, and they were not giving any value to the value add that people give, they no longer were the best suited prospects for them. And it took me a couple of years to wean them off of that account. But when they finally got weaned off of it, and they went after the Navy and built a whole division, well, that's when they saw their velocity really skyrocket.
Well,
so your existing customers may not be your future customers.
Yeah, exactly. You know, this whole idea of a velocity mindset, I really, really like it. I'm so glad we got into the psychology of selling, not just from our own standpoint, although I think, you know, if you got a problem, the first place to look is the mirror.
Right.
And because usually that's where our problems lurk, is, you know, that person we're looking at when we look in our mirror. And again, by adjusting our thinking, by elevating it, by using some of the principles, and we've just scratched the surface of the velocity mindset. This book is great. Let's put that book back up again, please. All right, there's that book. It is a great book. So I want to make sure that we are getting that, taking a look, digging deeper into that, and really evaluating where we're at now, using that assessment, and then elevating what we do to achieve maximum velocity. Ron, I want to thank you for being with us. You were fantastic, and I really appreciate what you shared with everyone today.
Thank you so much, Daniel. It's been a thrill on my part.